You're absolutely right. That's why I love the older guys.
Yeah.
From Gibbon.
Yeah.
Oman, Carlyle, Churchill, Will Durant. All these guys.
Yeah.
It's just superb.
One of my favourites is Harold Lamb.
Yeah.
I love Harold Lamb's description. Like we've got to do like Iron Men and Saints at some point. The Flame of Islam, because like his writing style is very rich. You feel like you're reading a novel, and it's
like that,
it's lovely. But anyway,
even Tom Holland, who's among the best ones, probably my favourite living historian, and his writing is very, very good. For me, it's still not as good as something like Gibbon or Oman or Durant or somebody. It's
but Tom Holland, you can tell that he's trying to hark back to that older kind of historian who's prepared to enrich the world with a bit of flowery prose, which I think is perfect. I'm tired of this sort of like scientific modern historian. I don't want that. I want to be drawn into the story. I want heroes and villains. Actually, that's what helps me remember what happened.
Yeah, anyway. Tell me a story.
Yeah.
I'll read another quick paragraph here from Oman, just about basically on the origins of the war. He wrote, "The 7 Years' War, like the War of the Austrian Succession, had two sides, the colonial and the European." Two theatres, he means there, really. In 1756, as in 1742, England, while contending with her own objects beyond the seas, was also subsidising a powerful continental ally. So we spend lots of money, just like in the Napoleonic era. We've got all the money, really, so we can pay for other people to do a lot of fighting on our behalf. So we're subsidising a powerful continental ally who had his own interests to serve in order to distract the attention of France from the more distant struggle. So one of the grander strategies we had was the idea that if we can force France to sort of spend all its time and energy and money in a European war, it will just leave the rest of the world open for the Royal Navy to go berserk, for us to steal all their stuff, basically.
Which is fairly reasonable.
And it was a very deliberate ploy from us. So the Prime Minister in this is Pitt the Elder, First Earl Chatham. So he becomes, the Prime Minister. Is removed for a while, then comes back and is in control for the rest of it, basically. And it very much is, very deliberately, his stratagem is to do that. Because we knew that France, we knew that was the way France was inclined anyway, that they wanted at all costs to try and take Belgium still, or parts of the Netherlands. That was really important. And but there is actually a reversal of the usual alliance structures in this. That's the big thing. We'll get to that in a moment. If I finish the quote from Oman on the origins of it. He said, "The new war resembled the old in another respect. In each case, it was the colonial quarrel which first came to the front. The European strife was a later development. The causes which provoked the 7 Years' War were to be found both in America and in India. In both of these quarrels, the representatives of England and of France came to blows before the mother countries had resolved on war. The quarrel was the result of natural causes which made it inevitable, and not the deliberate work of the timid Newcastle or the selfish Louis XV." That's according to Oman. So that is a bit of opinion there.
Sure, but it's probably a well-informed opinion. It's very evident that you've got two burgeoning world powers that are competing over the new world, the new territory. I mean, France has a lot of the new world, nominally at least at this point. Britain obviously has the 13 colonies and probably wants more. So, of course, events are going to drive in this direction. It's very similar to sort of Roman Carthage fighting over Sicily. It doesn't require either one of them to have a Machiavellian commander saying, right, we're going to provoke this. Events are going to provoke themselves.
So this war is so important because the state of affairs before and after it are chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
So before it, Britain and France are sort of fairly genuinely rivals, and after, Britain is dominant. France is bankrupt, very, very nearly bankrupt.
Spoiler alert.
And in fact, a real spoiler alert here is that a lot of historians say rightly, that it's really this war that leads directly to the sort of cascading of events, which leads to the collapse of France and the French Revolution.
So the weakening of the French monarchy.
Big time. I mean, so a lot of people might know anyway that it's where Britain, after this war, forced the American colonists to pay for it in some ways because it was so expensive.
Wasn't it like a 2% stamp tax or something?
There was all sorts of taxes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the stamp tax is just one of them, but all sorts of different taxes. Tax on tea.
How dare they?
So it very nearly bankrupted Britain, or it's so expensive that we were forced into sort of extraordinary measures. That was for us that ended up winning it. Ended with a global empire of commerce. It was still that expensive. So to the loser, it was ruinous. Yeah, absolutely. So there's two main portions of this. Like I say, I won't really go into India too much, although I'll mention it at the end of who gets what and how it all ended. But the two main theatres is in Europe. So if I sort of just paint the picture there, then I want to first go over and talk all in detail about America, because also chronologically it kicks off first there as well. Then I'll come back to Europe and we'll finish it there. So as I mentioned, the usual alliances are all turned on their head. Usually you can totally count on the Habsburgs and the French to be against each other, and therefore by default we're with the Habsburgs, and Spain and France to be together. And so a lot of that has changed this time, because where we have Pitt the Elder, our calculation is this, or in the mind of Pitt the Elder, who actually ends up being more than a prime minister. He gathers, because we've said in other times that there isn't really a prime minister as such. There's just a preeminent minister. It's not as we have now, where there's, the head of government and prime minister, and then he has a cabinet with various heads of department. Now, if one guy can sort of dominate all of government, he does quite often. So that's what Pitt the Elder's sort of doing, is that he brings into his own hands all the purse strings, all the executive functions, nearly, all foreign policy stuff, all of it. It all comes out of his mind. Now that garners him lots and lots of political enemies, but while it works, it works.
Well, if you have a competent man doing it, then great. The great man has arrived at the right time.
Yeah,
brilliant. Let's let him do his work.
And like a lot of things, like the director of a movie or the writer of a book, the best thing, the absolute best thing is to have one mind, one vision doing it. Lots of things, if you let a committee decide, it's just the end result is just naff.
Yeah, or chaos.
Yeah, okay, right, yeah. So anyway, Pitt the Elder, William Pitt, later the Earl of Chatham, is sort of running the show, and his idea, his view, is that we don't really care anymore about the power struggle between even Russia and the Habsburgs and the French and everything. All we care about is that we beat the French, because if we can beat the French, like in the whole world, if we can beat them, then nothing can ever touch us ever again. That's his thinking, and it's not wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's not at all irrational.
It's like, why do we care about sort of the delicate balance within the Holy Roman Empire? All we need is to defeat France, sort of, absolutely. And the rest is just child's play. The rest will all come.
If we have naval supremacy over all of Europe, which we ended up with, then we don't have a problem.
You hit the nail on the head, because the key part of that is naval supremacy.
Yeah.
Big part of it. It's like he's sort of saying, I don't care if, not that he doesn't care, but it's not as important whether it's
not mission critical, right? Like there are certain things. This has to be in our control, or else everything else is put into doubt. And Britain being an island, it's fairly straightforward that you have to have the better navy whenever the question arises. It has to be the case. And so it's literally mission critical for us to have naval supremacy if we want to be a competitive power in this particular game.
Yeah, no, absolutely exactly that. And so it's funny, interesting that it takes until the 1750s for us to sort of truly grasp that, realise that. I mean, of course, it's always been known on some level, whoever's got the biggest, greatest navy is a great advantage, but it's where it sort of crystallises in the mind of Pitt.
I wonder if this is a consequence of sort of this being the age of sail, though. Prior to that, were navies that important in the Middle Ages? Seems to be just a way of getting around prior to that.
Well, yeah, it becomes important in sort of the late Tudor age,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Like by the age of
by the time of the
Elizabeth,
Spanish Armada. But this requires the discovery of the New World, right? This requires a reason to build massive galleons that can sail for 20,000 miles or whatever. If you haven't got that, and you just need to cross the English Channel, what difference it make,
Yeah. If you're a maritime power, not like our main thing we needed was to be able to cross the Channel.
Yeah.
But if you were someone like, Genoa or Venice or something, but yeah. So by this point now, Pitt the Elder realizes that it doesn't matter who dominates Europe necessarily, whether it's Prussia, Austria, Russia, France. None of them have got a great navy, well, other than France.
Yeah.
And so
I was going to say that because the way you're saying it, well, if it's Prussia, Austria, Russia, who cares? Yeah, why would you care? They're all land powers. Like they can raise 200,000 men, fantastic soldiers, and okay, great, but they can't walk through the ocean. So that's not our problem.
So when the war starts, the numbers are something like this, and you can argue about this, and Navy history nerds do. Britain had something in the order of 130 ship of the line. France had something like 75, 80. So we already were sort of winning that arms race. But what Chatham's whole strategy is that we want them to have none, if possible. We'd like to just annihilate their ability at sea.
I approve of this strategy.
And then they can do what they want within reason in Europe, because it doesn't matter. We will always be way more powerful than them. Because another thing to say is not just that they can't invade Britain, but also what that really means is that they won't have a global empire.
Yeah,
that we will dominate commerce.
Yeah,
everywhere we go. It will just be a matter of time until we mop up every last one of their colonies.
And this is exactly the problem that Napoleon had. He was like, I'm going to make sure that Britain can't trade at all with continental Europe. Pfft, we don't care. We're literally taking the commerce of the world back to London.
Yeah. You want to buy things off us. We don't need your stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No more croissants for you.
Yeah.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.